morning.
Morning.
Let's go ahead and get started. We're a little bit late, but I wanted to make sure we had all our pieces in place here. There we go. So, hope everybody had a good night's sleep and had a chance to digest all the information we took in yesterday. And I hope your heads are no longer swimming like mine was yesterday at the end of the day. So our purpose this morning is to go ahead and have committee discussion on what we heard yesterday, formulate a report and with some recommendations to the legislature how we want to proceed with this issue. And I want to say we have a couple of representatives from ks today too to answer any questions if you feel compelled to ask questions about some of the subjects that were raised yesterday. We have Scott Bruner, Deputy Secretary of Hospitals, and we also have Brad Ridley, Commissioner of Financial Information. So I think between those two gentlemen, they can answer just about any questions you may have. If you don't have questions about what you heard yesterday, that's just fine, but they are here graciously to help us out. So at this point, then, I would also say that Senator Gossage has contacted me, and she's got to be virtual today. And so I asked Representative Carpenter to sit here on my left side and fill in for me in case I need to step out for a moment. And I think there may be a couple others on WebEx right now, but we'll go ahead and proceed, and I will open this up for discussion and recommendations for our report. Committee, what do we have? You have one? Oh. Representative Carpenter, you have something?
Yeah, I was going to just wait till everyone else weighed in. I didn't want to monopolize the meeting again. I apologize for yesterday. So one of the things that was brought up yesterday was taking a look at the one-year rebasing versus the three-year rebasing. I'm not sure we want to change, but it would be something that we could certainly look at to see if it works out better or worse. I think it was 3 years for a reason, but a study, looking back at what it would be versus 1 year versus three, we could take a look at that and see if it's more accurate. I know in periods of high inflation, probably like we've just went through, which was, you know, maybe an anomaly, maybe not. It's probably a better thing, but I wonder, you know, in the farming, they do, for their taxes, they do an 8-year running average, and they do that for a reason. And so I think sometimes the longer you can spread it out over that deal, it makes peaks and valleys a little bit better, but I think we should take a look at that.
Could I have one of the ks representatives approach the podium? And I would just like to ask what the logistics of a study like that, like Representative Carpenter is talking about. Would this be something we could look back at, say, a 10-year look back and see what the comparisons are to a one-year rebase, had we been on one-year rebase, as opposed to the current system of 3 years? What do you think the likelihood of that is?
Yeah, so Brad Ridley, Financial and Information Services Commissioner at ks. So I think we can. We would obviously be working with our rate-setting contractor, Myers and Stauffer, Dave, who you heard from yesterday. But I think, based on what I know, that's something we could look at.
And what do you think the timeline would be that we could get some kind of a report as to what those comparisons are?
I would think we could get something this fall, so hopefully have something for when session starts in January. But I'd have to confirm that with the folks that would be doing the work.
Okay, so. Thank you. Is anything else on that, Representative Carpenter? Or do you want to make that a recommendation for the committee's report?
I would hope somebody would wordsmith that a little bit better than I did, but I think Megan can do that.
Okay. And I don't intend to vote on each one of these recommendations. I think we'll just do a kind of a consensus. If there's no objection, we will include that in the report. Other recommendations? Representative Epley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I heard pretty compelling testimony, I thought, yesterday about the Medicaid add-on that you guys were great to craft and put together last year. I know for one nursing home group that I follow that's in my area, that was just is like resuscitation for them. It made all the difference between being in the red and being in the black this last year. I think that we should at least give consideration to doing that on a year-by-year basis, and I'd like to see us do it for another year. I don't think I want to see it become permanent, but I think we should look at it for the next year, starting in July again. So that'd be one recommendation. Second thing that I wanted to either take a deep dive on at some point in time to consider, and maybe Brad will want to talk about that if given an opportunity, sir, Mr. Chairman, and that is we didn't talk much about the survey process, and I've been, for lack of a better term, victimized by that as a medical director of a couple of nursing homes, and I really think we have a pretty ambitious survey process in the state. I know from in comparison to other nursing homes, and in other comparison to other states, we have a very ambitious group. Now, I know they're down on survey numbers, supposedly, but I know what the fines are in Kansas versus other states, and we're way above surrounding states on the survey amount. And I'd like to learn more about that and understand that. I think that has a real effect on the bottom line, and I think that that deserves more attention or more discussion. May want to hear more about it preliminarily today, but the survey process, I think, has really been deleterious to the success and to the profitability of a lot of our nursing homes in Kansas. And we didn't talk much about it, but I think that's something that needs to be considered. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to give you as a recommendation is I'd really like to look at a deeper dive on the comments that Mr. Kingsley made yesterday. I was intrigued by those, and I don't want to get too much into suppressing free enterprise and how businesses run, but this thing about shell organizations and parent companies and all that was a new concept to me, and I didn't realize how that could potentially be affecting some of the profitability of some of our larger chain nursing homes. And I think it deserves at least more discussion. And I don't know whether there would be any policies that we want to look at. And I'd like to hear from other members how they were impacted by that testimony. I thought it was certainly intriguing. I'd like to learn a little bit more about it. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, let's go through those one by one. Your first was, if I can paraphrase, you're making a recommendation for the report to ask the legislature to extend that Medicaid add-on for an additional fiscal year. Right now, we have it for fiscal 24. And you would say in next year's budgeting process, we would do an add-on for fiscal 25. Is that your recommendation?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, correct.
Okay, I personally think that is a good idea. What they asked for yesterday was for fiscal year through fiscal year 27, but I think probably the year-by-year approach is probably a better way to go. And if there are no objections to that, we will include that in the report as well. Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I totally agree with what both of you are saying there. Just to add a caveat to that, the transition of RUGs going to the PD/PM, that gives us a little time to see how that's going to work and what numbers that throws out. So staying short, and you know, I think that's a good thought for next year. So I just want to.
Okay, let me get back to that. I'm kind of making a little tally sheet here. Okay, we'll include that in the report for the add-ons. Then you also wanted to visit with someone from KDADS about the surveying process.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if that's possible.
Yeah, if we can call somebody forward, and I'll give you the microphone, and you can ask whatever questions you need.
Mr. Chair, I'm Scott Bruner. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Hospitals and Facilities, and I oversee the Survey and Certification Commission. Commissioner Lacey Hunter, who works directly over that commission, is here as well, and I may turn to her if some of the questions get into more of the detail, but happy to engage the committee in what information you'd like to to find out about.
Well, so the direction I'd like to go in, I understand that at least you're potentially understaffed at this point in time, but you're still getting your surveys done, I think, every 15 months as pursuant to CMS guidelines. And I realize, I know I'm aware of the assembly guidelines and how they're interpreted. I'm curious how we educate our surveyors and how they do interpret those guidelines, because it's all in how they're interpreted, and they're interpreted differently in other states, and the number of J tags. I don't know if you have any information on that today, Mr. Bruner, but and the number of tags that lead to facilities being closed, that lose their Medicare reimbursements. I just think, speaking on behalf of the nursing home population, our nursing homes, I think sometimes they go too far in their interpretation, realizing their federal guidelines that they're interpreting, but understanding it is subject to how the review process plays out in that interpretation, and that our state is we're more punitive than some of our fellow states, and maybe you have some information on that.
Mr. Chairman, so we'd be happy to share our performance data that we report to the federal government on investigations that we do, the surveys that we complete. We provide in our we have a monthly stakeholder meeting with nursing facility trade associations and others, and quarterly we share that information of what we're finding on survey, the top tags or deficiencies that we cite, and look at that trend over time. Happy to share that information with the committee. You're exactly right. We're for the federal side of our operation. We work under contract with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to enforce the federal regulations around skilled nursing facilities. So they provide the guidance on what we survey, how we survey, and provide the materials that we then train. That's delegated to us. We provide the training to our surveyors, but it's based on those federal requirements and guidelines. There are things that are subject to interpretation, or you kind of look at the conditions that are on the ground in the facility when we're on survey or responding to a complaint. And we do try to provide some opportunity for feedback from the facility on what our surveyors have observed, and through the remedy process. Maybe the other two just kind of general comments I would make are we do enforce the regulations that CMS lays out. We do cite facilities for deficient practices. But that's always starting from citing the deficient practice and then asking the facility to come back into compliance with regulations. So they have an opportunity to provide a plan of correction, to tell us what they're going to do to remedy the deficiency that we found. If that plan of correction isn't implemented or doesn't satisfy our review of what the deficiency was, then we can go to another level of enforcement. But we don't start with a fine. We don't start with recommending somebody lose their provider agreement with CMS to get paid for the services they're providing. Is it starting with one of the things we talk about a lot is that whether we're too enforcement focused and not consultative enough. And I think from our position on the survey side, our role is not to be consultative with facilities over what they should do differently. We're looking at their policies, their practices, what we observe when we go in, comparing that to the federal regulations and standards, and then saying you're not meeting it. What are you going to do to meet the standard? But the first step is not necessarily to say we're going to come in and close your building because of that deficiency. That's much further down the process. But we can share more of that information with the committee with trends over time. Commissioner Hunter sits on she's the regional representative for her colleagues around the state of other survey commissioners. So she's got good perspective on kind of what other states are doing and their approach. Because we have heard that same comment that you made, Representative Epley, about we seem to be more punitive than other states and trying to figure out, is that true, or what's different about our practice than what other states are doing, and do we have talked about what does that mean and what do we need to be doing differently. And I don't have a recommendation for you today, but I think we're self-aware enough that that's an issue that we do need to investigate.
Representative Epley, can you pause just for a second? Representative Carpenter had something to interject here.
So So on that same line, Representative, I and Commissioner Bruner had this conversation a week ago or so about, I had some calls, Zoom calls with representatives from the nursing home. And again, whether this is real or perceived, it's still an issue. And that's what we need to, and I told them, there's ways to correct actions and there's ways not to. And whether you're correcting in the correct way or whatever, it's perceived that you're being very punitive. And it could be a policy issue. You know what I'm saying? It's a perception, maybe not a reality, but it's certainly a perception. And one of the things that brought that to, so last year I introduced a deal in the proviso to allow nursing homes to apply for a waiver of the 24-hour RNs, because a lot of them were contract labor. They couldn't get nurses, and so I introduced this proviso. Well, I called here, I don't know when it was, but 2 people had applied for that. And I said, what the hell? Why only 2 people? Because people were just beating down my door because they were paying for these contract nurses, $150 an hour and they said, well, we were concerned about retribution. And that was very concerning to me. And I actually made a call just like 5 minutes after that to Scott. And Commissioner Bruner, and we discussed that very issue. And so I think that at the very least, and then that we should investigate that and try to, work with these folks. They're not the enemy. You're not the enemy. I know you have a role to play in correcting things, but there are ways to correct that I think more where, how can we help you versus, So anyway, it's a perception, whether it's reality or not, Commissioner, and I think we should address that. And the other thing is, how you have those meetings, but they were suspended during COVID, so
True.
you've only had one since.
We have kind of 2 or 3 different sets of stakeholder meetings, but there was a process to have regional roundtables with providers where our regional survey team would be out in a facility and meeting with the administrators and DONs, or directors of nursing and others. That was suspended during the pandemic. We restarted that, not regionally, but at the state level, virtually. Didn't work. Of course, it didn't work exactly the same way, but we are committed to continuing that process and trying some more regional, again, just to I don't know that it reduces the barrier, but at least we want to hear what facilities have to say about the process, where they see there's inconsistencies, so we can improve our practice as well.
Well, I would encourage that. I think that, dialogue is always good to find out what these people are thinking, whether it's real or perceived. It's still out there.
Sure.
So, and that's all I have to say about that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Epley, for pausing. You have the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Scott, I really appreciate you standing up here, and you went there, so I'm going to expand on this. I really think you have a capacity and an ability to act in a more consultative manner before you come down with a hammer, and I think the state can do that, and I think they should do that. They don't do that. They show up unannounced, which is how it should work, and then lots of times it's gotcha. And a lot of times the processes have changed in these facilities. They don't have the capacity to stay up to date on the latest CMS guidelines or how things have changed. And I really think the state should look at a way to have a pre-review, or if you have these Zoom calls or you have these stakeholder awareness times, make them aware of the new guidelines, and maybe that's done. Maybe you send out letters, and I don't understand the entire process, but I know full well there's a lot of gotcha with the surveys. And I think you said it. You said the word consultation or consultative. I think that would be very helpful. Have a reviewer come in and go over before the unannounced review some of the things that they might need to consider or be aware of. A lot of these nursing homes, can barely stay open, and they don't have the staff to review and understand what they need to be prepared for when it comes to a survey. And I think that I do. I believe this, that Kansas is more punitive than surrounding states when it comes to enforcement on the guidelines. And I think, I don't know how other states find the wiggle room, but it would appear to me that we're not allowing that in Kansas. And I think that's an opportunity for us as a part of this group. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If just, I don't have any disagreement with your comment. That's not the survey role, but that doesn't mean our agency shouldn't have that as part of our structure. Don't disagree with that at all. We have been, particularly during the pandemic, working with the federal government has created a structure of quality improvement organizations around the country to help nursing facilities with improving their practices, learning new things, adapting to the rules as they change. The Kansas Foundation for Medical Care is the agency in Kansas that does that work. We've been working on that relationship as well so that we can point a facility if they've got a specific problem or question about infection control or sometimes it is a staffing-related question. They can go to KFMC as that resource that doesn't have the regulatory responsibility, doesn't have the enforcement responsibility, and so it's separate. We've talked internally within KDADS about, we have and as you've heard over the last day, we do the rate-setting part of nursing facility work. We do the regulatory survey part of nursing facility work, and we try to do some things around quality improvement as well. Through payment and other kinds of structures, but that quality improvement doesn't have that as much of that consulting role that we think is necessary about how do you improve practice, improve quality, those kinds of aspects. So I think we are looking at what we can do to beef up that part of our agency that's not necessarily part of the survey process, and keep that independence between the two roles. But it does sit within our responsibility.
Representative Epley, did you have a recommendation for the report, or you just want to explore that a little bit?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And far be it for me as a rep member to say, but I think we need to do a deeper dive on the survey process, see how our metrics compare with other states, and I think from that we can provide more oversight and guidance to the KDADS on how this is going forward. It's always been I've been a medical director of a nursing home for 30-some years, 38 years, and I tell you what, everybody lives in dreaded fear of the survey, and when they show up, and it's always a gotcha, and there's just not enough education proactively so that they can do better on these. I admit, the survey serves a very meaningful process, and we need surveys, but on the other hand, I think we need to do a better job of preparing nursing homes for the survey process, and I don't know if KDADs use that as part of their function or not, but I do think that it's something that needs to be looked at to provide better information to these nursing homes. So that's a long-winded recommendation. I think we need to review the survey process, how our metrics compare with other states, and from that, let that guide our policy recommendations.
We, meaning KDADS, needs to self-examine, or we as a legislature need to check into that?
Whether it's KDADS or legislative research, I think there's opportunities there to get that information.
Okay, so your recommendation then is for the legislature to look into that and do a deeper dive on the surveying process? Okay, we
Yes,
got
sir.
that. Any objections? None? Okay, very good. And then you mentioned the holding company thing. Did you want to explore that now, or just?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I heard the testimony and I actually stayed awake through the whole thing, and I was intrigued by it. I think there's a lot of guardrails there we might go through, so I want to be careful. I don't know enough about the business relationships, not being a business person, on how those companies work. And he talked about three-way or different levels of corporate engagement. And I think that we ought to look at that, because when these companies, whether directly or indirectly, receive state money, I think we have a right for accountability and where that money's ending up. And if through a holding company, a nursing home is being held hostage to pay excessive rates that drives up their rates and makes them unprofitable, I think we have an obligation to understand that better and learn about it. I think we need to do a deeper dive on that and see if there are any policy opportunities to understand how state money flows.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too was intrigued by the testimony, and as I digested the information last night a little bit deeper, I guess some things came to my mind. Is it seemed like we heard a lot of the same issues of nonprofit versus for-profit. So I would like to understand what is the financial difference between profit and nonprofit, because it seemed to me like they experience a lot of the same financial issues, a lot of the same regulatory issues. So I'm a little bit hesitant to say for-profit bad, nonprofit good. If we're going to follow the money for the profit, let's follow the money for the nonprofit as well. So that would be my point, because I didn't hear, and maybe I missed it, and maybe we can get some clarification on the financial differences or issues between the profit and nonprofit. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Do you want to phrase that in a question to one of our KDADs?
Is there anyone who would like to maybe shed some light on the financial issues facing profit versus nonprofit and how that might relate to the testimony of Mr. Kingsley yesterday?
Scott Bruner, Deputy Secretary. I don't know that I have a good answer to the question. From our perspective as the regulator and providing licensing to skilled nursing facilities and adult care homes, we don't look at them any differently if they're for-profit or nonprofit. The license is the same. It's a license to operate an adult care home in the state of Kansas. If there's ever a change of ownership or a building's changing from one being sold to another operator or transitioning, we do a financial review of that transaction based on what's required under federal regulations. But again, that is neutral whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit. We're just looking at the nature of the transaction, nature of the organizations, things like that. So from a regulatory perspective, there's no difference to us about the ownership structure or profit or not-for-profit status. I don't know if that helps answer your question or not, but there are some other relationships, and the federal government's identified some other things as well that they've want to look at in terms of corporate structures and things. But again, from our position as the regulator, there's no difference in how we treat a for-profit or a not-for-profit.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Scott. I just want to make sure we should be good stewards of taxpayer money and expect transparency anytime there is taxpayer money involved. And I think that shouldn't be just focused on one versus another. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Haskins had a comment on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm in full agreement with everything that's actually been said. And I found Dr. Kingsley's presentation to be credible, but yet I do agree with colleagues that the information was left gaps, and I believe he probably left the gaps on purpose for us to continue a conversation. I do believe that he could provide more connections to the findings that he was reporting on. So in answering my colleague's question about my opinion, I feel like transparency is the main takeaway that I had from this, and that is a aha moment when he started to share his presentation of how deep this could go. And I don't want to create a controversy without the data. But I would like to see that data. And I did have a question for Scott, if I may, in clarification. The one thing that, and I don't know if you have his report or not, but he gave in figure A1, he gave a sample of a cost report. And I assume the cost report in some way gets communicated to KDAD. Is that okay? And
it's part of the rate setting process.
Yes. Okay, and then his statement was that it was filled out incorrectly based upon what he had confirmed to be true, and whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit. My question to you is, what percent of these reports are filled in accurately in the surveyor's opinion, and what percentage of them are just overlooked based upon the amount of information we have to and how quickly we have to turn around.
I think Brad might be a better, the survey side of the agency doesn't review the cost reports. That's on the rate setting and financial side.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, and we'd have to look in more on that example cost report. I know it was a CMS form. I'm not familiar enough with the details of that, so we'd have to do some follow-up if that's a KDADS, something KDADS reviews. But I think to answer your last question, when those cost reports come in to the state, there is a desk review process, a high-level review every year of those. So we can look at what percentage cost reports we find issues at a high level. And then if there's any issues, we do audit as well, a sample of facilities with the resources we have. So we can get you some stats on what our audit process is and what kind of issues we find.
Yeah, and I would appreciate that, and I do think it was the CMS is where he found that
right.
information. And so just to do a comparison would be helpful.
Sure.
And, in my words, it's like, hate the game, don't hate the player. And if they have an understanding of how to play this game better than others, then that's actually, what the free market should be about. But we have an obligation to regulate and to look into it to make sure that the rules are fair for all. So that was my opinion on that. And then I do have recommendations when the point comes to it.
Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And along those lines of thinking, have the audit team look into them. I'm curious because I've been trying to wrap my head around the testimony yesterday and how to best address it and collect all the data and make sure that all the data is there. So I guess I'd be curious if this is a situation where we as a legislative body would lean upon legislative post-audit for collecting the data versus KDAD's audit team, because I'm not quite positive that they would have the scope to pick up all the information that we'd want to gather to make sure that there wasn't the cooking the books, so to speak, that is legal, So I just want to throw that out there for committee discussion or conversation. I haven't come up with a wording of what we would request, but I just know that we have tools in our toolbox at our leisure. So put that out there for discussion.
Does that kind of fit in with what we're looking at, what your recommendation would be, you or Senator Erickson, regarding this? That strikes me as actually a very good idea.
Mr. Chair, strikes me as a pretty good idea, too.
Okay, so that would be our recommendation, is to have, do an LPA.
And again, I don't know what we would request from the LPA to throw in the hopper, the way that process works, but it just seems like there's questions here, profit, nonprofit, legal, not legal, complete, not complete, corporate structure, whatnot. So I don't know if we can wordsmith that as a committee.
We have some really good research people that could wordsmith that. Am I correct? Yeah.
I recommend an audit from legislative post-audit reviewing the ownership structures of nursing facilities in Kansas, including the use of holding companies and the differences between nonprofit and for-profit nursing facilities.
You make us look good. Thank you.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think that sounds like a really good idea. My only hesitation is we're requesting that audit based on the testimony of one side of the equation. I think just for vetting and due diligence, it would be nice to hear from maybe some of the for-profit side to get their perspective, and I'm not opposed to it at all. I just want to get to the transparency and the truth. But it seems like we're requesting that based on one side of the ledger, so to speak. And so I would just ask the committee to decide, maybe we need to hear the other side and then have all the information going into a request for an LPA. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, Senator, would that, hearing the other side, is that something we would do in the next legislative session in one of our committees, a subcommittee like social services budget or on the Senate side, or what is your exact recommendation here?
I will accept the best knowledge of how to proceed with that based on yours and others' expertise in that, but I do think we do owe it to hear from the other side of that assertion that was made yesterday.
Well, if you're relying on my expertise, that's a dangerous.
I am, Mr. Chair.
yeah.
I trust your judgment.
One side of me would love to hear all that now and explore it. We just don't have that kind of time, but I think in the next session, we could really, that one might be, like on my social services budget committee, that might be an interesting hearing, interesting topic. Would that be something, part of that recommendation that we could get that, let's put the cart before the horse, or the horse before the cart. We could have a hearing like that on, say, the Social Services Budget Committee, and then maybe that would yield the request to the LPA. Or Representative Owsley.
I don't disagree, but I also don't see that collecting the data during, because I know LPAs take a while to get through the process, let alone get the results. So I wouldn't want to not make that recommendation today, but I also would be absolutely supportive of, gathering as much information as we can from.
Perhaps a double barrel approach. We do both. We do
Right.
the LPA and we do the committee hearing. Is that Representative Haskins?
I'm all about meeting as much as we can because I love everybody here. And but I will say one aspect of it that maybe, and I think it's a great idea. But on the post audit, the one thing that I'm the most curious about is how accurate are the cost reports, and whether that's for profit or not for profit, because their resources are strained staffing-wise. I'm just wanting to make sure that if we're asking the question, is it being answered? Or if it's not being answered, is that a question that we should be asking? Because we have a 51-page summary or self-reporting for CMI. So I don't know how to word that, but the magician over there maybe can add that if we so agree. That was my main question, is how accurate are the cost reporting, and are there gaps in that? And I'll leave it at that.
Senator McGinn.
I guess the only concern I have is it sounds like you want to go down a dual path and you want to do the LPA request and get that in, I don't know, when, the next time they meet, or I guess my concern is what are the questions going to be and what are they going to look like? And I don't want to just go forward and waste the post-audit's time if we're not asking the right questions. So is there a way, if you're wanting to move it forward, is there a way, I don't know if we can do it via email or what, but or maybe staff can take a stab at what they think the questions are based on what they've heard, and then let us at least respond to them back to staff about if we think that that's hitting the target of what we want. So I just don't want to send them forward and then we didn't ask the right questions.
Other discussion? Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And probably that was one of the most upsetting things that happened to me yesterday, was that one-sided accusation with no opportunity for the opponent or the person that was called out to defend themselves. And I'm all about transparency, and I think we spend a ton of money in nursing homes, so I have no problem with making sure that we're spending that money properly and that there's no improprieties or anything like that. But it just, one of the deals that I live by is I treat people how I want to be treated. How would any of us like to have someone up there at the podium just making these wild accusations with no backup, so to speak, or anything like that, and not to be able to at least tell your side of the story? So I don't have a problem with any kind of audit or transparency or anything. But I just think that was entirely one-sided and inappropriate is all I'll say about that. Thank you.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with everybody. I'm not going to go back into any of that. A couple things that crossed my mind driving home last night was trust but verify. You know, so we're not accusing anybody, but we need to be verifying. So I would think, Brad, if on your part, when you say high level, what entails high level, I'd be interested in that. When you get into lease contracts and how those fit into tax returns, I've been around deals where they stack this high, and you need to have a professional looking at those things. And so high level and who does that, that there's somebody around here, and I don't think I really would want to run the post audit to start with. I think I'd rather see what the agency could do with that and say, this is our concern. We need to trust and verify these issues. Make sure there's somebody that has the ability to go in and look at what he brought up, because there can be other things in there too. You can make a book on that. So I'm just thinking that this is something that they can work on and see what they can come up with and kind of report back. We go to post audit, it gives us a picture where we're at today. There needs to be something in when we do surveys, certifications, licensing, something needs to be in there that says, here's the financials, and look at them and look for these kind of things. And maybe even consult with other states on what they do with this and say, do you ever see an issue with that? And just do some fact finding on this kind of thing and see what we can come up and see what they can develop that might cover this area. So, and maybe they are at this point. When you say high level, it'd be interesting what a high level is and, you know, that kind of thing.
Do you want to ask that question of the commissioner? Oh, okay. Yes.
So on the desk review process, I'd have to go back and have staff kind of give me an overview of how deep they go on that process. I know it is fairly high level because we do that within about a month's time of 300 plus cost reports. So, but we can get you some information on what that process looks like.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, do they take and look at lease contracts, you know, or not?
I don't, at the desk review process, I know we don't get into that.
See, and that's potential for something to look at.
Sure.
So I can see where the potential is with what he's talking about. And once we get the information, that kind of helps us on how we set up our pricing. You know, they're entitled to make a return too. So we're looking for a fair deal for everyone. So, but trust but verify goes into this too.
Was the agency aware of that testimony yesterday that we were referring to from Mr. Kingsley? I mean, were you?
Heard it yesterday, in advance of the committee meeting yesterday?
No. Were you aware that he had said those, that made those allegations? Was someone here monitoring for your agency?
I was not aware of that testimony until yesterday.
No, I mean, you were aware of it then yesterday, right?
Correct.
Okay. And is there any response the agency would have to that other than just, okay, no.
I mean, if it's the committee's direction, if you want us to look into that particular accusation and that transaction, we can do a review of that, but we haven't done that since yesterday.
You understand that, yeah. Well, thank you. I think we're just trying to formulate what our recommendation from this committee would be. I think we have kind of a mixed opinion here on the legislative post audit. Would it be appropriate to start with the agency, have them look into these allegations, and then move from there? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's where I would see, and I would envision you guys sitting down and looking at your processes on the financials, and then maybe coming back and reporting to somebody in committee, you know, down the road so that we get a feel of exactly what we're doing, you're aware of the potential issue, and making sure that this doesn't catch us in the future. And not to say it in the past. I'm just saying this is something we need to be looking at, so.
Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman, I don't mean to interject. I do want to make a distinction of two different processes. So there's the regular cost report process that happens annually as part of the rate setting that Commissioner Ridley was speaking about. We also look at the financial transaction information when somebody's changing ownership of a facility or it's being sold or purchased. And there's a separate review of that happens on our licensing and credentialing side. So I think if that's the committee's direction to us to review, what do we look at in those financial documents? I think if it's okay with the committee to include what we look at when we're processing a transaction for a sale or transfer, or because that's another point where we're reviewing financial information, ownership information, legal documents, things like that, that's outside the regular annual rate setting process. And I think from your discussion and from having read the testimony from yesterday, it kind of encompasses at least, I think, both of those processes that are internal to KDADS. If at the will of the committee, of course.
And that process you could have that information to us in the next session, or when?
Next session, sure. Or whatever the appropriate, to social service budget or a health committee or wherever you think that's the appropriate place.
Okay. Committee, more discussion. I'm kind of thinking maybe we need to take this in a logical progression. I think maybe the internal review by KDADS, and then a hearing in the next session, and then possibly that could trigger an LPA. I don't know that we want to do them all concurrently, do we? I don't know. Discussion. Representative Epley.
Just a variable as you consider this, Mr. Chairman, and that is these parent companies that eventually get some of the profitability from these nursing homes, they have nursing homes in, 20, 30 states. And so I don't know how we can, there's an opportunity there for metric comparison between state to state. And I don't know how much access to data KDADS will have in these other states. I mean, are the rates the same? Is the profit margin the same, say, across these other states? And so that's just a variable I want you to ponder. I don't have an answer. I don't know which entity would be able to give us a better comparison. But, again, because it's our state taxpayer money that we're shelling out, I think we need to know how we stack up with other states when it comes to, rent, amortization schedules, payments for their property to these parent companies.
And the internal review by KDADS is adequate or not adequate?
Mr. Chairman, far be it from me to know. I think that it would require looking at other states, how these holding companies impact other states also with their other nursing homes. And I think that needs to be, I think we need to get information on that so we can compare how Kansas stacks up.
And Commissioner, can that be part of that review? Do you have that data from other states? Is it out there?
I don't know. We're kind of processing the question in real time with you all as well. So we may need to think a little bit about what the question is and what information we have. When a transaction happens in Kansas that relates to a Kansas facility, we ask for information about the nature of that transaction and costs and the legal ownership and things like that. And it might be a good thing to maybe talk through with legislative research and share, here's what our process is when we do a transaction or rate set. How does this, how would that help inform the questions that you want to find out more about? Because we don't go, as part of our rate setting process, and Brad will stop me if we don't look at what other states are doing. We're setting cost for a facility in the state of Kansas being paid for by Kansas Medicaid. So it doesn't matter if the building is owned by somebody in another state, there's money passing through, there's a lease ownership agreement, it doesn't matter. We're paying for that person who's a Kansas Medicaid consumer in that facility. So it's a little independent. We do get some of that other information. I'm not quite sure how that's going to answer the question that that you're trying to formulate.
Very good, thank you. Representative Ousley.
I think that kind of answered my question, because I was going to ask, not only do they have the capabilities, but do they have the resources to dedicate, and since our question might not be formulated just yet or processed just yet, we may not know at this time, but I do know yesterday, and going through the KDAD slides, I did hear about operating limitations and this and that, but I didn't hear anything about the lease contracts, which makes me think it's going to be outside of their scope of operations, either resources to dedicate or capacity to gather data from the other states. But I don't think anybody can give us a solid yes or no, answer upon that today. So I'm here for the discussion.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to me, the bottom line is quality of care. So to me, it's how all of this transparency and following the dollar, is there a correlation between that and quality of care? And that, to me, is the driving factor in my motivation for wanting to get at this. One, to be good stewards, but is that money, is it going to provide the best quality of care for those residents? So, I mean, I don't want us to lose track of just following the money trail, but not correlating that or have a causation to quality of care. So I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The word that was brought up yesterday a lot was transparency, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think those are things we need to look at. And, the allegation was that this money is being funneled from McPherson and other homes to a Florida holding company or whatever. But if those holding companies own the buildings, and then this is rent or insurance or whatever, that may be perfectly legitimate. There may be nothing untoward about this. But again, the transparency is the issue that I think we're looking at, and how do we get there? I think that's what we're trying to formulate here. I don't know where we really are. I think it's something that we should have KDADs look at internally, and I think we should have a hearing on it in the next session. And then I think that could possibly trigger a request for LPA. That is my opinion. Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once we go through the process of that, it's like on that page 2 that he gave us, to say that that's legal, doing what they're doing, we're not saying it's not, kind of thing. When everybody talks transparency here, I think they need to be transparency to the agency. We don't need to have this public information. This is businesses. This is my opinion. But I think they need to be doing their homework on trying to dig things like that out just to make sure, because we're looking for a fair rent price. And if they're sitting there saying we're losing money, but they're getting a whole lot of money on the rent, that's the kind of things that somebody needs to be digging into to that level. So.
Representative Haskins.
Just to circle back and just conclude with my opinion is I think that you do have a rational approach. If I'm the KDAD, I would want skin in the game and make sure that I have my justification of everything that's been brought up as a concern, and then have your session to hammer this out. Is there really an issue with the idea that a post-audit may be inevitable? I mean, that to me is, I think we're all, make sure this is noted. I feel like we're all saying the same thing. And so this is an important issue, and it makes sense to me. So.
All right, we could move on. Megan, you kind of have what that progression is? Yes. Yes.
KDAD should review the following and provide a report to the House Social Services Budget Committee. Ownership structures of Kansas nursing facilities, including the use of holding companies, the current cost reporting process and structure, financial information reviewed when a nursing facility is sold, and the differences between for-profit and nonprofit nursing facilities, including the quality of care. Further, the Social Service Budget Committee should consider whether requesting an audit from legislative post-audit on the topic is appropriate.
So you're not just playing video games on there. Once again, you've knocked it out of the park. Lovely. Okay. If there are no objections, then we'll go with that. We'll leave that in the report and we'll move on. And getting back to Senator Fagg, you had, I think, a recommendation about the rugs, or did you not, or just?
No, I was kind of, Mr. Chairman, I was kind of adding to what Representative Depley was saying. That's another reason for that.
Okay.
Not putting that off a year and going with what you guys did last year.
Very good. Very good. Representative Haskins, you had some recommendations.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's just, I'll try to be direct to this. I believe a lot of this has already been covered, but specifically what I'm interested in is, as a colleague has stated, is making sure that the quality of care is there and that we have a system that makes sense. And one thing that had come up several times was the incentive program, and that we need to revisit that. And I guess I would have this question is if the illustration that was given is that there's a percent of what is to be funded is set aside for incentives, but the incentive program is such, it's, I think the quote was, it's good on paper, but in reality it's not. How does the incentive program work? And I'm not sure who should answer that question.
So the incentives are just add-ons to the rate, but right now it is one pool of money. So whatever money's available for that is tacked on with those incentives, and it's part of the overall nursing facility budget.
And then what happens to, if no one takes advantage of those add-on incentives, what happens to that money?
But if we don't use the money in incentives, it would not be spent on the nursing facility program.
Okay, so how much of that incentive money is being spent?
We'd have to go get that.
That would be
dollar figure.
something I would be curious about, because why have an incentive program if it doesn't incentivize anything? And with that, I would encourage a recommendation that we look at incentives to follow along with the recommendations of those that had testified that we focus on improving behavioral programs and access, and I would encourage that we look at adjusting the incentive program so it meets the current needs and so it's timely and relevant. And that was one example that came up. The other thing that I just jot this down while we're talking, is like I would really like to see an incentive program that would retain ownership of nursing homes by Kansas-owned businesses, and return to supporting mom and pops small businesses to keep the money within the state. And so perhaps an add-on could be given if the legal structure identified by the Secretary of State can be validated as owned by a Kansan. And I'm not sure how we can word that, but that seems to be kind of along the lines of what we've been wanting as well. The last recommendation I had is on the Medicaid add-on, and it's I would really like for us to consider the Medicaid add-on being something that becomes permanent after perhaps 3 years of a verification of, assurances, and that there are benchmarks out there that it's showing to be productive. I understand there's a reality of it, so I will just add that as I hope we look at that as something that we continue, because it does demonstrate that we have improved on that. But I think there needs to be assurances that everyone's filling out the report right, that we have expectations and that they're delivering it. And so I'm not sure how you want to word that, or if that's something that the committee wants to even consider, but it sounds like the Medicaid add-on would be something that would benefit everybody in the permanent after we've gathered enough information to say, yeah, it is working. And I lied, I did have one more, and that is 50-plus pages to fill out on each patient to determine a case mix index. I mean, you should see my students' faces when I give them a 100-question multiple choice test. I mean, I can't imagine that being an efficient way of determining and talking about straining a system. And perhaps all this is done by the federal government and we just have to abide by it. But if it's something that we can look at to kind of regulate or streamline, I think that would be a win-win for everybody. So that's all I have.
So can we go through those one by one? We'll just briefly talk about your first recommendation. It had to do with quality incentives, correct?
Yeah, quality incentives and to get at least do a deeper dive on are they even relevant to have, and it is concerning that we put aside money and we don't know if we're actually spending that money on the incentives. And then specifically, I would encourage us to look at how can we improve behavioral programs at the nursing homes, and then just an idea is like, can we give, what do you guys think about an add-on to encourage state-owned, keeping the money within the state of Kansas?
Okay. And the deeper dive is by whom?
I think it would be through KDAD.
Okay. All right.
And I'm
Committee.
fine.
Let's discuss that right now. Committee, any discussion? Yes, Representative Epley.
Actually, an easy question, and someone from KDADS can answer this, I'm sure. The incentive program that we have in Kansas identifies certain metrics that, you know, if the nursing homes do this, then they get more funding, and that's great. Are those guidelines from the state, or are those driven by CMS recommendations? I just was curious how we evolved our incentives program.
So the incentives are state. We prepare them. We do go through the state plan, so CMS ends up approving them, but we develop them at the state level.
Are they consistent with a lot of other states that are doing similar incentives, or are they a lot different?
I really don't know. We'd have to look into that.
Would that be helpful information?
Probably.
Okay.
Okay. All right, thank you. Representative Carpenter.
Just a quick clarification on that. It's a daily rate, and the maximum you can get is $4.50, and it's incremented depending on the top tier is $4.50 a day. Just so we.
Okay. Any? Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a quick question. Are all of the incentive programs with the goal of quality of care, are they all quality incentives? Or the reason I ask is that, as Representative Haskins brought up, you know, ownership in Kansas as an incentive, or could there be cost-saving incentives for, you know, I think Senator Fagg brought up yesterday, I believe, was the utility costs that, say, in a facility does changes on their building so they have better efficiency on utilities, reduces costs, reduces the funding to them, they get an incentive to do something like that? Or is it all quality of care for the incentives? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think for the most part, it's all based on quality of care. I mean, and I don't have a list of them in front of me, but staffing ratios, turnover are some of the quality incentives. The PEAK program that was discussed yesterday is about the resident and the quality. So overall, I think right now they're focused on the quality of care.
Oh, Representative Haskins.
Yeah, and just to clarify, my recommendation is not to remove necessarily incentives to help obviously improve quality of care. It's just I want to make sure if it's an incentive program that we're actually, and we're putting money aside, that we're actually doing what we say we're going to do is incentivize improvement. If we're not, then let's just keep the money and put it back in and figure out something else how to use it.
So recommendation one is to have KDADS do an internal review of the quality of care incentives. Are there objections to including that in the report? Seeing none. And your second one had to do with looking at an incentive to incentivize Kansas ownership. And that is probably something we could do as a budgetary thing. I'm thinking, yeah. Would that be what you're looking for, Representative?
Yeah, that would be. I'm just trying to find a compromise based upon the discussions and concerns of going back to the legal structure and who owns the business. And then I already had the note down, like we need to revisit the incentive. So I just, if we're giving state money, that should stay with the businesses that are supporting fully the state of Kansas overall quality and economics. So, and where that falls, that's up to
Representative Carpenter.
And I don't disagree with that concept, but I'm not sure, you know, if we have a choice between having a nursing home in a town that's owned by someone out of state versus a state person, I think we should look at it, but I just don't know what the ramifications are going to be of that if, if the nursing home in wherever gets, is corporately owned, but they're operating there versus someone not operating that's state-owned. There's just some, I think we can flesh that out, but there's just maybe some unseen consequences out of that.
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, and I agree again with my colleague. I'm just looking at the definition of incentives, and to me, that would be a logical incentive is to encourage state-owned. In no way am I saying let's close a nursing home because it's owned by a corporation outside of the state of Kansas. I mean, that's the free market. We have, again, hate the game, don't hate the player, and that's just how the system is working. I'm just looking at the definition of incentives and how we can best utilize it if we're putting aside money, and we can interpret whether that's for quality assurance or whether that's for ownership. That's all. And again, it's just a recommendation of an idea that I just wrote down 5 minutes ago.
Well, and I think the recommendation would be that a legislative committee just look at that as far as an incentive. Senator McGinn.
I think a good place to start is finding out how many are already owned by somebody that is incorporated in the state. And then we can find out whether there's a reason for an incentive or not. So I think that should be in, I don't know if we're going to, I don't know where we're at on this LPA now, but I think that's just some information that we need to have. And because it's such a highly regulated business to just start. Like if I decided all of a sudden I want to own a nursing home, it would probably take several years just to get all the regulations and everything else ironed out. So I would be kind of curious as to how many are in-state operators versus out-of-state.
Representative Owsley.
And maybe a little bit more useful information might also be how how many funds are in this incentive pot? What have we spent down to that? Are there the incentives available out of current resources? So
The discussion committee. Senator Fagg.
I'm going back to what Representative Rice got me fired on this interview. If we have an incentive program, maybe part of that could be where we have if a third party went out and did an energy audit, which Evergy used to do that. I can remember a time where gas service one of the other did. And they come back and then the owner of the organization says, well, we could, it's going to cost us $1 million to replace windows and a new heating and air system. And you can see on paper it's going to pay for itself within 7, 10 years. They used to do that kind of stuff. Maybe the state could consider putting some money in a pot where you put in half, we put in half. Incentivize with some money to do the right thing to make it more cost-effective in their business plan. So I don't know how you'd word that, but that would be an incentive that would help the bottom line because we want to keep these nursing homes open. And if we can help with utility bills, incentivize them to do something that's good for everyone, that has to help the system.
Well, let's hold that thought just for a second, and let's get this Representative Haskins' recommendation.
Okay.
Representative Haskins.
Overall, thank you, Mr. Chair. Overall is I just want a review of the incentive program and make sure that it's doing what we expect it to do, and what would be the relevant and timely incentive program for it's openly not being used, but yet money's being set aside for that, and then it's just getting absorbed. So that's my recommendation, is to get us take a deeper look into the incentive programs, and that can be done by KDAD and whomever else is best practice for that.
All right, and on WebEx, we have Senator Gossage with a question. Are you there, Senator?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Here we are. I'm sorry. I think I was unmuting the same time somebody was unmuting and it ended up crossing each other out. Thank you. And sorry I couldn't be with you in person today. Um, so I have three. One would be, I know that the insurance commissioner's office keeps track. You can go online and look at each of the insurance carriers and see how many complaints that have come into the insurance commissioner's office. Do we have something like that? Maybe I can ask staff, or ask one of the representatives from the departments. Is there something available like that regarding the nursing facilities and complaints that have come in about them?
Senator, can you hold it for just for a second?
Of course.
I'm sorry, we were right in the middle of a different recommendation, and we can get to yours in just a couple minutes, okay?
Of course.
All right, if you'll be gracious enough to hold, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so regarding Representative Haskins' recommendation for the report, that we just simply have the agency look at the incentive programs. Is there any objection to any of this? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that my thought could be tagged on his deal there possibly, as a possible incentive.
Including energy efficiency.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. If there's no objection, Senator Bryce, all right, Representative Bryce.
Thank you for the promotion, Mr.
You're
Chairman.
welcome. You're welcome.
It's not a promotion. Okay. Just to bounce off of, again, Senator Fagg's comment, I'm learning so much, and I appreciate everyone being just allowing me to comment. I'm a new guy here, but my impression is this whole cost reimbursement structure for Medicaid, in a sense, ratchets up. There's very few incentives for operators to cut costs because they get reimbursed for costs, and so there's a constant inflation of costs. And so, as Senator Fagg was saying, if we can not only incentivize quality of care, but if there's some way of incentivizing cost cutting, even though we're paying out, if we can have a net decrease in our payout for these facilities because of cost-cutting measures, and the utilities is the example. But if there's some way of, and again, I'm a new guy, you guys have probably gone down this road many times, but if there's some way of incentivizing cost-cutting measures, maybe someone could look at that along with other incentives. Thank you.
Let's ask our resident wizard. What do you have for your recommendation?
So right now I have two. I'm not sure if this is correct. I have one that is KDAD should conduct an internal review of the current incentive program structure, including how much funding is currently available for programs or incentive programs. And then I have a second recommendation. The legislature and KDAD should explore the use of incentives, including the following: encouraging those that focus on behavioral health programs and services, those that retain ownership of nursing homes by Kansas individuals and businesses, those that encourage energy efficiency. In addition, exploring the ability to add state funding to enhance availability.
And we'll move on, and we'll get back to Senator Gossage. Are you still with us, Senator?
I am. Can you hear me still?
Yes, you have the mic.
All right. So the first recommendation that I had, and maybe let me just go back and say, I did not want to interrupt. I know it can be difficult when you're not there in committee to just, raise your hand, but I wanted to just comment on a couple of other of the recommendations. One is the Medicaid add-on. I definitely think we should look at that for this year. Again, they're looking back 3 years, which we would still have been in the COVID days. And so I see no problem with reviewing that. I do have a problem with just saying we should definitely put that in the budget. I think we should find out how much that is, what we're talking about here. Because as a chair of the committee for the public health on the Senate side, if things don't come through our committee, but things are just put on the budget, at least this gives us an opportunity to hear why it should be added on to the budget. Another thing would be, I think we just need, again, I'm going to echo what Senator Erickson had said, which is let's keep our focus on quality of care as we're looking through these, which is why when we of having an internal review, I would think if there was some concerns that would have already come up. But having an internal review, they only have 24 people overseeing 300 facilities. I think that that's an excellent idea. So back to my personal recommendations, as I mentioned, the insurance carrier or the insurance department they don't say specifically what the complaints are, but there were 5 complaints against this insurance company or 28 with this one. And I'm wondering if we have that kind of transparency for the public from the department.
Anything else, Senator?
No, I just was waiting for maybe someone to respond to that. Somebody from the department, did they respond to that?
Okay, the commissioner is up here now.
All
Sorry,
right.
Senator. We do aggregate the complaints that we get through the abuse and neglect hotline. We track the facility if it's named in the complaint. But the main thing we do with that, those complaint numbers is then triage each complaint at the severity. And so we keep track of how severe each accusation is and then what our action is from there. But we track that on a regular basis, both for the CMS certified facilities and our state licensed facilities.
So then, but there is nothing for the public to see. So if somebody's thinking about putting their mother in this particular facility, they couldn't go to the state website and see there were 12 complaints about this facility.
Mr. Chairman, could I have Commissioner Hunter address that?
Good afternoon, committee. I'm Commissioner Hunter. So when allegations come into our abuse, neglect, and exploitation hotline, we take every call. So we take the call from the girl who just got fired at the nursing home. We take the call from the daughter who had a fight with her brother at the nursing home about mom's care. We take everything that anyone says. So that being said, the only information that is available to the public is once we have taken that allegation, done a proper investigation, and found there to be a violation, that information becomes public. Every single allegation that comes through our hotline is not public knowledge. We must investigate, see if there's truth to that allegation. If there is truth to that allegation, those citations are made available to the public.
Very good. Well, that was going to be a recommendation if they were not. And I think it would be good to know where that information could be found. Could you get that back to us, please?
It's publicly available. There is a public website that provides the facilities information as far as surveys, the plan of correction that they submitted, as well as when we went back out to do an revisit and see when they were back into compliance. That same public site also gives you the administrator, the number of beds that home has, the type of license they hold, and the owners listed on the license. But that is a public database that runs in real time every day.
Very good. Thank you. If someone could email me the link to that, I would appreciate it. And then the other two, if I may, Mr. Chair, we heard about, I think it was from Leading Age testimony regarding the two things. One was the critical access model. And I would be interested in knowing, they said, could we look into critical access model for nursing facilities like we did for hospitals? I'm not even aware that there is such a model or if this has been done or what that entails. So I would just like to know if that could be reviewed by the department or someone could look into that possibility. And then number 3 would be the provider tax increase discussion. I think that was on the last page here, saying how they seem to have winners and losers in the provider tax increase. And again, if we could just get a report back on that. Who are the winners? Who are the losers? How might that be adjusted? And that's it for me. Thank you.
So you're asking the agency to produce those reports, Senator?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Committee discussion on those. Representative Epley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the concept of critical access model for nursing homes is interesting. I will say that I know, my understanding, being a part of a critical access hospital, that's primarily federal, and I'm not sure we can get into that business. And I think it might be, well, it depends on how you roll it out, but I think it'd be cost prohibitive if we're not careful. So just wanted to comment about that. Thank you.
Other discussion, committee? Megan, could you kind of give us a synopsis of those recommendations?
They're not very well written out at this point. KDAD should provide the legislature with information on the critical access hospital model for nursing facilities. Is there more specific information?
No, I think that's it. I just want to know what it is.
KDAD should provide the legislature with a report on the provider tax increase for nursing facilities, including amounts that providers have received, how the tax is distributed.
Yes.
Is that correct, Senator?
That's,
okay.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
You are welcome. Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted a point of clarification. I had two other recommendations that we didn't have a chance to discuss, and I didn't know if we wanted to circle back on that. That was the one of whether or not making the Medicaid add-on permanent after 3 years of reporting data. It seems like I'm saying exactly what Senator Gossage has said, is like, we don't do it unless we have the information. And I'm not sure where we go with that, but I don't want it to be forgotten that it's added a lot of immediate value to that. And the other one was just maybe just a question about, do we have to have a 51 or 50 plus page self-assessment? Is that us or is that the federal government? And that's the federal government. You might want to come to the mic and say that. So I see the nonverbal. But
Yes, that is a federal government form. That is not a form that we control here in Kansas.
Darn federal government.
Yeah, I'm surprised it's only 51 pages then.
Yeah. Never mind. I strike it. But it was just the Medicaid add-on permanent. That was all.
We were going to look at that Medicaid add-on year by year, right? Or are we talking about a different thing?
No, that's it.
Okay.
Would we be open to making it permanent after a certain amount of time?
Possibly, but I think right now we just need to look at it year by year. Representative Carpenter?
Just quickly, we can't bind future legislatures to spending like that without being in statute, so.
Committee, other recommendations for our report? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yesterday, since we got the resident experts in here, I brought up about $62 a month that people would get. Are you aware of that, how much it is? I had two nursing homes that had talked about the person that I take is on Medicaid gets so much money they call personal money. And I think it's $62. So I was wondering if you confirm it is 62, if it's been a long time, is that a federal deal? Is that a state deal? Just kind of talk about that, because that was an issue to them if we're talking about quality of care, because that was the one thing both the people I was around was bringing that up.
Is there someone in the attendance who could address that? Brad.
I'll take a shot. So I think we call it the protected income limit on the Medicaid, in the Medicaid world, and that's something we do work with KDHE on. There was an effort, some of you might remember several years ago, to increase that amount for the home and community-based services programs. But it was not adjusted for nursing facilities when that happened. But I don't know if I can confirm the number, but I think the 60 number is one that I've heard over the years, so it seems like it's probably accurate.
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, is that something set by the state or is that a federal deal?
I think we said it, yeah. So, Scott Bruner, Deputy Secretary, so Brad's exactly right. There's the protected income limit. That dollar amount is the personal needs allowance. Personal needs allowance that's also identified in Medicaid eligibility rules. That's money that the resident gets to keep out of their Social Security that doesn't necessarily flow to pay for the cost of their care. We can check with Health and Environment if that's something that we control as a state, or if it's set by the federal government. Since we're not 100% sure, we can verify that with the Department of Health and Environment.
Okay. So I guess driving home and playing with the numbers, that could go to 75 real easy in my mind. That's just my opinion. So I guess we got to know which one it is first. If it's federal deal, it kind of throws it out. If it's state deal, then we need to consider bumping it a little bit.
Committee, other discussion? Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't know that these are specific recommendations, but just things that I was pondering, such as, do we have a plan in place so that we're being proactive rather than reactive on if the federal government increases the staffing ratios? I mean, they're estimating that that could be another, $26 million. And are we just going to wait for that to come down and then go, okay, now what do we do about that? So my question is, do we need to be looking at a specific plan to deal for if and when that should happen? If it doesn't, great. But if it does, we're prepared to take that financial hit. My other question is centered around the fines that are enacted. It looks like we had over $3 million in fines last year for noncompliance with CMS guidelines. Kansas received, a little over $1 million of that. And I know the intent is for that money to go to improve the quality of care, but it's very telling. It says it may be used for that. And so as we're looking at funding incentives, or is there a way to tap that? Well, my big question is, why is the federal government keeping $2 million of that? But that's neither here nor there. But what are we doing specifically with that $1 million that we might use in a more efficient, productive way? So I guess more questions, and do we need to address those or not, Mr. Chair? Thank you.
Are you making a recommendation, Senator?
Okay, I would, Mr. Chair, you're putting me in the corner, but that's okay. Well, I would recommend that we look at having a plan in place for staffing ratios. We know we have a statewide issue with workforce development. This will only exacerbate that. And if we have an idea that it's coming or potentially coming, I think we need to do what we can to be prepared for that. We're already strapped for staff. We hear that constantly, particularly hard hit our nursing facilities. So I think it would be a little bit lax on our part not to take a look at what we can do to start preparing for that. What's the worst that can happen? We increase the number of staff in nursing facilities, which we need to anyway. So what are some solutions? So I'm making a recommendation that we look into those solutions, whether that's during the legislative session, we hold hearings on how we can address those and take a look at partnering with education institutions, putting that on steroids. I know there are already efforts in place for that, but I don't want to be caught being reactionary rather than proactive. And again, I think this goes with, as we're looking at funding, I think maybe not a separate recommendation, but is there a better use of those penalties, those civil fines, the $1.2 million that came in, that we can target more effectively to do some of the other recommendations regarding incentives or other areas that this committee has put forth? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And so the recommendation would be for the legislature, a legislative committee, to examine a plan to deal with that?
That would be my recommendation, since we are having, it's not just a social services issue. Workforce development is broader than that, but this will be a specific mandate coming down that I think we need to be prepared for as much as we possibly can.
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I hear this throughout every interim committee that I have. And, you know, whether we like it or not, it really all boils down to money and funding, because these nursing homes are top-heavy with labor, their labor costs. And so how do you get those labor costs up? You fund them. We've done that with the ID and the DD program, where our average starting pay in the ID and DD providers is $14 an hour. They've seen a decline in their rates, you know, of hiring and all that kind of stuff. So, but that's what it boils down to is, think about this. Minimum wage now is $15 an hour. I mean, you look around the board, everybody, hamburger joints, you name it, you pay $15 an hour, you don't get anybody. So it's about funding. And it's that simple. That's how you attract people. There's no way that we're going to attract people if we don't pay them that amount, you know, a living wage, or so to speak. And so I agree with you 100%. We have that conversation throughout the board and CanCare oversight about direct support DSP folks, you know, and it's about, we've just got to get those wages up so that they can live on what we pay. And it's, I applaud any effort that we can to get people in the door at nursing homes. But it boils down to, very simply, it's funding.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I don't agree. We all know that money is what drives most things in our line of work. However, I will say there are some workforce development issues, such as the apprenticeship program. If we can get people in high school or in college, if they can get college credit or, you know, professional hours, or build their resume by serving in some of these roles through apprenticeships, or, you know, workplace experience, hands-on experience, rather than sitting in a classroom, but they're out in the field learning, you know, I think it's a win-win. They're getting real-life experience, and it's help filling a need. So I do think that, yes, it does take money, but there are other opportunities that we've recently passed, and the apprenticeship program is new. But let's see how maybe we can tap some of those initiatives to the benefit. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee discussion on that recommendation. Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I totally agree with you, Senator Erickson, and with what Representative Carpenter was saying. As I'm sitting here, unfunded mandates, if we made a list up of unfunded mandates we have out there, we would be, it would scare you. So I don't think I worry. In my personal opinion is, we have a rainy day fund that would be covering that kind of thing. And then I would think we would examine that as the risk arise, because we're going to have other risks coming out with that possibly, and that's kind of, if we went in there and had this plan, I'm afraid that plan would change so much before we actually got it done. I don't know where we'd be, and I hate to spend the time on it till we, you know, have fire. Now, that's just my opinion. So unfunded mandates, we could spend the whole summer here working on them.
True. Committee, other recommendations? Other discussion on this recommendation? So, Senator, to capsulize your recommendation, it is for a legislative committee to create a proactive plan. Well, Megan could say it much better than I. I'm going to. Megan.
The legislature should explore ways to support nursing facilities in managing new federal requirements governing staff ratios, including staff incentives and partnering with educational institutions to grow the nursing workforce.
She took the words right out of my mouth.
You're almost there.
Okay. Any objections to this? Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, we will report that. Any other recommendations on our report? Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yesterday, we heard some discussion about dementia care and how much more labor intensive that is in various homes, and we all know that. And so we might discuss an add-on for the level of care that they're providing for dementia or Alzheimer's and stuff like that. Just a thought, discussion committee.
You're saying as a legislative committee to look at that and evaluate that next session, or are you talking about
Correct.
looking at it today? Okay. Committee discussion on it. Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just one caveat, I know that was the request, I think, from the administrative representative to have an add-on, daily add-on for dementia care. But I still don't understand, since we have the cost mix index, why this 52-page report, what have you, why does it not take into account the added costs for that? And it may, so another possibility for addressing the issue would be to make the cost mix index reflect that, so that the facilities have the ability to hire more staff when that's present. Thank you.
Committee discussion. Representative Haskins.
Whether it's an add-on or just a review, I think it can't be ignored that dementia and other behavioral issues are not a factor in the reimbursement rates, and it can't be ignored. And so, again, I would support the recommendation of an add-on for behavioral, dementia, Alzheimer's, any issue. Because we can't ignore that. But whether the add-on is the best approach or taking the incentive money that's been set aside, not used, I don't know. But I would support the add-on.
Your recommendation is to review it and evaluate that in the next session.
Yeah, of course, and it may already be factored into the formula, like Representative Bryce said, but I think we do need to examine it. There's no doubt that these folks require more care and a higher intensive level of care, and are they being properly compensated by the funding that we do now?
Very good. Senator McGinn.
Would that be by per occurrence or per patient?
I think it would be.
Because
Thank you, and Mr. Chair, I think it would be a per patient.
if, the reason I'm asking, you could have one patient that has one outbreak because of either a family situation or whatever, and now they're going to qualify for every year thereafter.
Well, and correct me, somebody out there, but I think these are, the cost reports are evaluated, the payments are evaluated like every 3 months, and then they're raised or lowered every 6 months, if I'm not, am I talking out of school on that?
So I think, Representative Carpenter, that the rates are set each year and are adjusted for acuity once midpoint of that year. So we do adjust rates for those acuity mixes.
So may I ask? So it's not like a coding situation? We had an outbreak, we had to put them in a safe room, whatever. Now we code that happened that day.
Right.
It just is going to just go on their permanent record.
Yeah, so it's based on what happens today is that acuity is based on the case mix that was discussed yesterday and that assessment of individuals. But I think what we're hearing now and what we've seen, one thing we've seen over the years too, is that addresses physical acuity, not necessarily the mental acuity for dementia or mental health issues. So I think the question is, and my notes are, what are the solutions to address that, whether it's an add-on or are there opportunities to adjust the case mix to include for those behavioral needs?
Committee, other discussion? Senator McGinn.
Yeah. Now I want to add on to Megan's paragraph, and that is, I would be curious as to, are there some nursing homes that are equipped to take on dementia patients better than others? And if so, I'm wondering long-term if we should look at, maybe that individual needs to go, to this town, not that town. And we want them all close to home for sure, but, you have hospitals that are equipped for geriatric dementia and outbreaks and things like that. I don't know if we would have any type of nursing homes that are equipped, or do they just send them to the hospital, which that happens a lot too. But what I'm getting at is, if we're going to start talking about taking care of people with dementia, Alzheimer's, then we need to also look at long-term solutions as well.
Committee, other discussion on the recommendation by Representative Carpenter? Megan, could we have that capsule?
All right, the legislature should review methods to reimburse treatment for dementia care, including adjusting the case mix index or creating an add-on incentive factor. In addition, explore the various levels of care provided by facilities and how more facilities can be brought up to a certain level. That's where I wasn't quite sure what you were getting at.
Senator.
Trying to think of the word. Not to a certain level. Are there nursing homes that are better equipped than others? So that you don't, it's very expensive when you get into holding or putting people in a safe room, because of literature and things like that. So if we knew what was out there, that maybe there are some facilities that are more and better equipped than others, it'd be maybe better to focus on what they're doing in the long term.
Okay, committee. Any objections to that recommendation? Megan, you have an objection? No.
No, I don't have this time. Is it all right if I just read the end of that
Please.
again? All right, so in addition, explore the number of facilities specifically equipped to provide this level of care.
Committee, any objections? All right, then we'll move on. Are there other recommendations, or are we ready to finalize our report? Representative Carpenter.
I just have a couple more real quickly. These should be fairly easy. So we've heard yesterday about the administrator's licensing requires a 4-year degree and 400 hours of whatever. And I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but it seems to me like we've looked at a lot of this licensing and what do we really need for these folks to be able to run a nursing home? Do they need a 4-year degree? Or could it be experience or whatever? I don't know. But I thought that we had relaxed that a couple of years ago for some reason, and I guess I just thought that, but it wasn't real. So I think we need to examine what the licensing requirements are for administrator in a nursing home. I know a lot of them struggle with getting administrators, and especially in our rural towns and things like that with a 4-year degree. And so anyway, that's a very simple one, I think, and we could do that. It seems like we could do that
Committee
fairly
discussion? Representative Ousley. Senator McGinn.
I just was curious, I must have missed this part. What is the degree in? Anything? Just a college education? And 400 hours?
Please proceed.
That is correct. There is no specification on what the bachelor's degree needs to be, and it just needs to be that you have a bachelor's degree.
I can have a music degree and do that. That's what it sounds like. Okay.
The other part is the practicum part, it's 480 hours.
Is that high compared to other states?
I haven't done too much research, but I do believe Kansas has a pretty high standard for the requirements for licensed nursing home administrators.
And that is a Kansas standard. Is it statutory? Is it regulatory? What?
Correct. It is Kansas. I'm not sure if it's in my statutes or in my regulations, but it is not federally driven. It is state driven.
Okay. Representative Ousley, did you have something?
Just a comment. I'm not typically one for lowering our standards. If we have them, we were meeting them at once upon a time, and somebody felt they were necessary. If we do hold higher standards in other state, I'm not against exploring. So I guess just for clarification, the recommendation wouldn't be to relax our standards, but to look into, are they appropriate for this period in time? Okay, thank you.
And Representative Carpenter, who does the looking into?
I think research could probably do a look at what other states are doing and what their licensing requirements are before, and report to the Public Health Committee in the Senate and Social Services Budget Committee. And then we could go from there. Probably it would end up in more than likely the Health Committee at the end of this, but I think research could give us an idea about what other states are doing and where we're at on that.
And also find out if that's statutory or regulatory. Yes. Okay. Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since we got resident experts in the area, I was wondering, as far as administrators, is there a lot of openings for that right now? If we have one, do they get a lot of apps? Just wondered if somebody'd like to respond to that.
Linda Mowbray, Kansas Healthcare Association, Kansas Center for Assisted Living. There are openings for licensed adult care home administrators across the state. And while Representative Carpenter is correct, the process was looked at several years ago and kind of opened up a little more leniency with reciprocity. Reciprocity is still one of the large issues. And if you're licensed with experience in another state and you've passed your federal exams, your NAB exams, you still have many hoops to jump through to get that Kansas license. I have a person in Missouri, a person in Colorado, and a person in Florida that are trying to work through the system. They've been licensed administrators, one for 3 years, 5 years, and one for 26 years. And they're still having to do additional requirements to get their licensing in Kansas. Senator, the applications that come in, very limited. The money that individuals are wanting to fulfill those jobs is much higher than it had been in the past, where the facility might be willing to pay $85,000, a 40-bed facility for an administrator. Their candidates are asking for at least $120,000, $130,000.
Senator Fagg, anything else? No? All right. Representative Ousley.
Thank you. And just forgive me, I'm going to think out loud. We've talked about quality of care and incentives and, measurable outcomes for, staff to patient ratio or resident ratio. And I wonder if on this conversation and topic, if there wouldn't be a measurable, quality of care outcome for the salary of admin or the standards of admin. And I just want to throw that out there as well. Keep that part of the discussion.
Very good. Committee, other discussion on the recommendation? Megan, would you capitalize that for us?
Kansas Legislative Research Department should explore the license requirements for administrative positions in nursing facilities in other states, including the practicum requirements and efforts other states have made to make these positions more accessible, review which requirements are federally set and those that the state is able to adjust.
Wow.
All right.
Yeah.
Senator Erickson.
Exactly what I said.
I know.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we want to take a look at license reciprocity, to Linda's point, in this area or not? Would she said we don't have license reciprocity for, is that correct?
Linda, would you clarify
Yeah,
that?
would you clarify, do we or do we not have license reciprocity for nursing facility administrators?
There is a reciprocity process, but even with the years of experience, based on what their education was or how much their initial practicum was, they might have additional hours they have to do in Kansas to meet our standards, instead of just looking at, hey, they've been doing this for 5 years, they've been doing this for 10 years, you know, apples for apples, let them have their license in Kansas. They may get credit up to a certain amount of hours for that 480-hour practicum, but there's not a direct crossover from state to state.
Representative Haskins.
Linda, while you're still there, could you help me out on, when you mentioned license, is this a industry credential? Is this a license for Kansas? And you also mentioned something about once they pass their certification exam. Can you just, what is it that, just help me out, what is it that you're referring to?
For CMS certified facilities, our Medicare skilled facilities, an individual does need to have that national credential, and it's NAB, National Administrators Board. Yes. Yeah. And that is a national test, and it's standardized across the country. In addition, Kansas has a Kansas-specific test over the Kansas regulations. Some other states have that state-specific, some do not. But in order to run a licensed, skilled facility anywhere in the country, you have to go through a NAB-approved course, pass that NAB-approved test, and then there are some other standards to keep your license in good stead.
And that's helpful. What are the qualifications to sit for that exam? Do they have to have a baccalaureate degree, a 4-year degree? Do they have to have X number of practicum hours? Can they just sit for it at any time?
For Kansas, we have additional requirements.
Okay.
And that includes the bachelor's degree, the 4-year bachelor's degree, and the 480-hour practicum.
Okay.
NAB itself does not require a 4-year degree, and they do require an approved course, but the hours in that are not specified. So one state may have 1,200 hours in a practicum, and one state may have 250 hours in the practicum. So that is a state-by-state decision that's just evolved over time.
Thank you so much.
Further discussion on the Carpenter recommendation? Seeing none. Are there any objections to that? Okay. Representative Carpenter, you had one other quick one you said.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have one quick one. We heard talk about targeted case managers for the other waivers, which I did not know that other waivers did not. Now, they have a care coordinator through the MCO that takes care of their levels of care, but they do not have targeted case managers like the ID and the DD. Folks, I would recommend that we take a look at that. Obviously, it's going to cost money, and we need to take a look at that and see the benefits and whether that's And prefer the waiver that I'm talking about, frail and elderly, which it covers nursing homes and stuff like that. So anyway, that'd be my recommendation, to take a look at providing targeted case management for all waivers.
Committee discussion on that? So I was kind of distracted there, Representative, I'm sorry. To provide targeted case managers or improve the rate, or exactly what
Just to
again?
look at what it involves, I have no idea, and I did not even realize. I know they have.
To have targeted case managers.
Right.
In this. Okay.
I'm not advocating for them till we study it and look at it. I just don't know, and I think it's a question that we could answer. Can that help the quality of care for folks on, especially on the frail and elderly waiver, which is what we're dealing with mostly in assisted living and nursing homes. So
And we look at it as a legislative committee, or?
as committees,
Okay.
Social Services Budget and Senate Public and Health.
Okay. Committee discussion on that recommendation? Were you able to capture that, Megan?
I think so. The legislature should explore the funding and structure required to extend targeted case management services to additional waivers, including the frail elderly waiver. And I know there are 2 others, and I'll add them.
Okay. Any further discussion on this? Objections? Okay, we'll make that a part of the report. Now, are there other recommendations, or are we ready to put this thing to bed? I think we're ready to put this thing to bed. Let's just go ahead and vote on it. All in favor of the report as submitting the report? Oh, Megan.
There are a couple that came early on that I just want to make sure I got the language
Okay.
at a place where the committee's
Yes.
comfortable. The first one is that KDAD should explore and provide a report to the legislature on the benefits and challenges of shifting the rebase process to include 1 year of cost reports rather than 3.
Correct.
The legislature should extend the Medicaid add-on for nursing facilities based on the number of Medicaid residents served for fiscal year 2025.
Correct.
And the legislature should review the survey process and compare the process in Kansas to other states, including fine amounts, metrics, surveyor education, and the role the state agency can play in ensuring that facilities are aware of and understand federal guidelines and requirements.
Very good. I think I will take a vote on this, submitting the report as presented here. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. I think we're good. Committee, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank the panel for a lot of hard work and a lot of substantive discussion. I want to thank the staff for doing yeoman's work. I want to thank the agency for being here and doing double duty today. And I want to thank all the conferees and attendees who were here to present. And I think we're done, and we will adjourn this meeting.